Hi folks, this is Truth Nerd with Fact or Fiction, back with the third installment of the Debunk the Physicist series. We're going to touch on some brown dwarfs and get into the electric universe. First we'll just do a little review because the physicist, or the doctor as Scott Cohn has called her now, working with Potter and WSO and the Biru channel, is still claiming that this image from February 2007 on the Sechi is actually the brown dwarf. I guess the claim of the object glowing in the image is supposed to support this. But as far as I know, that we can't see in the 304 angstrom ultraviolet spectrum. So this image would have to be colorized, or it would just show up to be a black picture in that wavelength. So they add color to this, and when it's passing in front of the sun, it would be subject to the same visual light rendering as the sun, and I believe that's what would give it this glow. Here we have another simulation that was conducted using the ORSA program, which stands for Orbit Reconstruction, Simulation, and Analysis. This is a scientific grade tool that's used for performing solar system integrations. The moon transited across the sun from stereo behind's perspective in precisely the same trajectory seen in the EUVI images, as can be seen when overlaying the images from the simulation on top of the images from the spacecraft. The object transitioning the sun in stereo behind image was precisely the same size and in the same position as the moon was predicted to be according to ORSA. So as we can see with another overlay, it is in fact the moon crossing in front of the sun from the camera's perspective. Now let's move on to more issues that the physicist has come up with. We might as well call this part of the video the Jerry Bell section, as he's helped me to understand what's going on in a lot of these photos. Here we have, in this photo on the right, what the physicist has determined is a brown dwarf. She states, the object has plasma ejections in the form of plasma loops as shown. The plasma loops indicate that this bright object is a star with a very large magnetic field for its size. The image on the right in figure 7 shows a lens flare of this star, so we know exactly what it looks like. Notice that it is not spherical but oval shaped, and its axis is tilted by 20 degrees. Sometimes the issue is not always a lens flare, but data not cleared from the cache being sent from the satellite, but it does work good for the fear porn narrative. Here's the original image, and I've got to say it sure does look like a huge brown dwarf. This is the last image sent before the image that I showed previously from the EUVI. You just need to rotate it and flip it and get some orientation. Now just see if they line up to be able to prove if it is in fact just a data glitch showing up. Now with them side by side and the EUVI on the right flipped, you can see all the places I have noted that match up perfectly. In this next image, you can see I have overlaid the two images, and it is in fact a perfect fit. And so goes another brown dwarf proof that is actually just a glitch in the cache data. Next, we will address some more fictional claims on one of Potter's Physicist Thoughts videos, where she tries to use the multi-day movie maker from Sechi. This tool will almost always show a dark shadow besides Earth. But you can pick a random date from the multi-day movie maker and we'll see that same nefarious shadow next to Earth. If you're not scared by now, you should be, because the shadow grows a Birkeland current. The image does show a blooming line, and the lines are more exaggerated in different processing methods, but should arise from bright objects, not the shadow. So let's look at this from raw data and see if the bright object is present. So, what is that bright thing on the left side of the Earth on March 23rd, 2016? Quick check with Celestia shows the object causing the problem is, once again, the moon. The see-through quote-unquote brown dwarf only shows on the multi-day movie maker and lasts from 11/21/2016 to 11/27/2016. and just so happens to track with the Earth perfectly. You can clearly see the stars behind it, and as it does not show on the raw data files and only shows in the rendering of multi-day images, it's safe to assume that it is a rendering error in the production of the image and not corrupt damage sent from a satellite. The image from November 16th can be attributed to the data from the EUVI getting mixed in with the H1 imager from a satellite, as the image in the background is the sun, and the Core 2 data gets mixed images also a few frames later that is not shown. The mixing of the data from the same time frame is easier to see in the EUVI image and pretty self-explanatory to see image pickup data from two cameras. The rest of the video really isn't relevant, as the mystery shadow is just the moon, and she's still trying to justify why she was wrong about the SDO eclipse. So what exactly is a brown dwarf? Because I'm not so sure that Dr. Albers actually understands it. Brown dwarfs are wannabe stars. They are just too small. They can't generate the huge internal pressure needed to trigger hydrogen fusion in their cores. So brown dwarfs don't generate their own internal energy. They do fuse deuterium, but not for very long, and that's a pretty wimpy energy source anyways. With no internal energy source, brown dwarfs spend their time cooling off, but it takes a while, billions of years. Brown dwarfs are between about 10 to 80 times more massive than Jupiter, but they are about the same size as Jupiter. Compared with Jupiter, brown dwarfs are just more squished under their own gravity. They are much denser than Jupiter, but not much bigger. A brown dwarf would appear reddish-brown and gigantic in the sky. But look just to the side and you can see the stars. It would basically look like nighttime, except in the direction of the brown dwarf. Clouds would simply be black patches blocking the stars. The view from a planet orbiting a brown dwarf might look something like this, without clouds. Here's some ballpark numbers. Within 30 light years of the Sun, there are more than 400 known stars. The vast majority are low-mass M stars, also called red dwarfs. 20 are Sun-like G stars, and at least 48 are brown dwarfs. They say at least because more are being discovered all the time, but there is no brown dwarf within about 6 or so light years away from our solar system. So I wondered why everybody always says that you can only see brown dwarfs in infrared, so I asked astronomer Dazza the cameraman to explain. He says, just to be clear, the only reason we image brown dwarfs in infrared is because they are so very far away from the sun that they do not reflect enough visible light to be seen. The nearest brown dwarf is 6.5 light years away, more than 2 light years further away than the nearest stars to our sun. If there was a brown dwarf within our solar system, it would certainly be close enough to reflect visible light from our sun, just like any other planet, moon, asteroid, or comet does. And with the size of a brown dwarf, it would be easily visible, just like Jupiter and Saturn, or even brighter. There's nothing magical about brown dwarfs that would make one invisible to ordinary folk and astronomers if it was right within our solar system. So, until we see something like this in the sky, I don't think we have anything to worry about. So I got to thinking, what would actually happen if a brown dwarf entered into the solar system? Judging by that model, I think it's safe to assume that there is currently no brown dwarf anywhere in our vicinity. The whole idea that a brown dwarf could be in our inner solar system and not have any effect on the planets is entirely based off the electric universe theory. So, what is the electric universe theory? The electric universe concept does not meet the National Academy of Sciences definition of a theory, which is a comprehensive explanation of some aspect of nature that is produced by a vast body of evidence and can be used to make predictions about natural events or phenomenon that have not yet been observed. In physics, theories need math. That's how you predict, gather evidence, verify, disprove, and support. But EU theory isn't big on math. One EU theorist said, mathematics is not physics. Well, while that equation inversion makes the theory pretty much a non-starter for mainstream astronomers, it is the exact thing that appeals to many adherents. EU is completely at odds, however, with everything modern science has determined about the universe. At best, the electric universe is a solution in search of a problem. It seeks to explain things we already understand very well through gravity, plasma, and nuclear physics, and the like, said astronomer Phil Plait, who runs the blog Bad Astronomy at Slate. At worst, it's sheer crackpottery like homeopathy and astrology, making claims clearly contradicted by evidence. We know stars generate energy through nuclear fusion, not plasma discharge. We know craters are formed from asteroid and comet impacts, not huge electric arcs. We absolutely know that special and general relativity work, despite some EU proponents' claims, said Plait, who has tangled with EU commoners a time or two. From what I've seen, most EU claims are on the cranky end of the scale. That's why most astronomers ignore it. No evidence for it, tons of evidence against it, and no support mathematically or physically. EU makes few predictions. It doesn't have a unified framework or mathematical laws underpinning it. The underlying physics doesn't go far beyond, it's electric. Data doesn't support or disprove specific hypotheses, and where are all these electric arcs in space? And what could their power source possibly be? We'll let astrophysicist, astronomer, and chief lecturer at RIT, Dr. Brian Koberlein, explain EU a little bit. You can do a Google search for Dr. Koberlein and find that there comes up over 33,000 results, so I think he is more than qualified to explain this kind of thing. Testing the Electric Universe by Brian Koberlein. So, where to begin? Let's start with the Sun. In the standard model, the Sun is powered by nuclear fusion in its core. There, the fusion of hydrogen into helium produces not only light and heat, but neutrinos. In the electric universe model, the Sun is lit by electrically excited plasma. This gives us two very clear predictions. The first is regarding neutrinos. The standard model predicts that the Sun will produce copious amounts of neutrinos due to nuclear interactions in its core. The EU model predicts the Sun should produce no neutrinos. The EU model clearly fails this test because neutrinos are produced by the Sun. We have not only observed solar neutrinos, we have imaged the Sun by its neutrinos. The second prediction regarding the Sun can be seen in its spectrum. In the standard model, the nuclear reactions in the Sun's core produce light and heat that cause the star to shine. If this is the case, then Sun should emit thermal radiation. In other words, the spectrum of colors it gives off should be almost continuous, with dark lines where cooler gases in its upper atmosphere absorb some of the light. If instead the Sun were lit by electrically excited plasma, as the EU model predicts, the spectrum should be discontinuous spectrum of bright lines. Plasma discharges do not emit a continuous spectrum of light. Of course, what we see is a continuous spectrum as the standard model predicts. Once again, the EU model fails. Unlike the neutrino observations, the solar spectrum has been well observed since the 1800s, long before the EU model was ever proposed. It is a test that you can do at home with a diffraction grating. Beyond any shadow of a doubt, the Sun gives off a thermal spectrum, not a plasma one. Well, how about the idea that stars give birth to other stars and planets? If that were the case, we should see stars form as isolated objects in stellar nurseries, then later form planetary systems. Instead, what we see is protostars form with protoplanetary disks of gas and dust out of which planets form. We've observed these at various stages of development around different stars, and even have dozens of examples in the Orion Nebula, which is a nearby stellar nursery. Electric Universe fails again. If you'd like to hear more from Dr. Brian Koberlein, you can tune in tomorrow where we interview him and Astronomy Live on the Fact or Fiction channel at 7 p.m. Eastern. We will be going through and discussing some of the theories that have recently been put out by channels like Nibiru, Planet X 2016, WSO, and the Chris Potter channel, who have been sharing all these white papers from their physicist. Well, we have no reason to hide the name of our physicist. He will gladly take questions in the chat, and we'll just get a little further into it and see what he has to say. This has been Truth Nerd with Fact or Fiction, and hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow at 7 p.m. on the Fact or Fiction channel.